smiling faces, and almost all except for the 2 phone calls, but I know there's smiling faces behind that. And oh, it's great to be connected with you folks again. And well, this has been a significant weekend. You know, on Friday we had Juneteenth, and boy, it's good to see the celebrations that are going on in Sacramento. It's great to see your smiling faces, and almost all except for the 2 phone calls, but I know there's smiling faces behind that. And oh, it's great to be connected with you folks again. And well, this has been a significant weekend. You know, on Friday we had Juneteenth, and boy, it's good to see the celebrations that are going on in Sacramento. And who knows, maybe someday this will be a national holiday. Change is happening in our world. Now, yesterday was the summer solstice, the longest day, or the day with the longest period of sunlight, when we officially entered the summer season yesterday. And today is Father's Day, a day we honor those who served as our fathers, those father figures in our life. And it's also the end of Flag Week. You know, last week was Flag Day on Sunday, and they asked that during the week we display our American flags out front. And I've got my flag out front, and I think I'm the only one on the block with a flag out, but that's okay, we do it. And this thing about Father's Day, you know, thank you, Father's Day. You know, it had to start way back after the Civil War. A gentleman named William Jackson Scott, and he was a Civil War veteran, and he was a single dad, and he raised a daughter and 5 sons. And his daughter thought that it would be a good idea to have a day set aside to honor fathers. I mean, she saw her dad doing a great job, you know, being a single dad way back then in the 1800s, early 1900s. And she petitioned to have a national day set aside. And in Congress, in 1914, they had started the action, but it took 62 years before they kind of actually made it a national holiday. And Richard Nixon signed the bill into law in 1972. And I think the guys in Congress, you know, most of us guys, yeah, we don't like to get ourselves patted on our back all the time, you know, but we love to feel needed. Love to feel needed. And I came across a poem about how dads serve in lives, and it was by this one gal in Colorado, and she had written this poem. She says, "Without a dad, where would we be? Would our red kite still be up in the tree? Without a dad, the roof might leak, the gate might get rusty, and the lawnmower squeak. Who would fix the car in a bad snowstorm while we sit in a gas station where it's warm? Who would beat the Nintendo at chess every night? And who would pick out the best camping site? Who would work 8 hours a day and then stand in line to get his pay? For love and kindness, none beat our dad, who stands by us through happy and sad. If your dad is far away or close to you, there's one thing you can do on this special day. Show him your love in your own special way." You know, and I had a wonderful dad. And Steve, thanks for asking about pictures, because I went and got 2 pictures that I have of my dad. Here's one. You can see that. I think it was the day he got married. He's in kind of a formal tuxedo. And there is a lot of resemblance between Bobby Brach and Walter Leo Brach. So, and then I have one other picture that I have. When I was 16 years old, I was boxing for the Police Boys Club in Chicago, Illinois. And my mom brought out this picture, and she said, "Bobby, do you remember when this picture was taken?" And I looked at it, and I said, "You know, the gym I train in doesn't have brick walls like that, and I never had leggings like that." She says, "That's not you, that's your dad." My dad was a semi-pro boxer in his youth. He was active in horses, and you know, all the stuff that he did manifested in my life later on. You know, I had a horse ranch. He was the one who took me on my first horseback ride. And his friend had a riding stable in LaGrange, Illinois. And I remember sitting on this horse on the saddle in front of him with this big gray horse's head in front of me. And I think that lit a little fire for me. And when I was boxing, you know, I didn't tell my parents I was boxing. And until I got a bloody nose one time and got a shirt ruined. And my mom says, "You're not supposed to be boxing." And, you know, my dad refused to sign for the Golden Gloves. He says, "No, those are headhunters. You're going to get hurt." And, you know, I have wonderful memories of my dad. And one in particular related to unity. I had heard about Science of Mind. Oh, there's pictures of Dad there. And when I was growing up, the Science of Mind magazine was always on the coffee table. And I didn't realize the connection to unity until I went to Unity Village for some classes, and I heard about, you know, Ernest Holmes and Science of Mind, and I went to the store at the Overland Park Unity Church, and there on the counter was the Science of Mind magazine. So I subscribed to that, and I was reflecting. Now, here is my dad reading Science of Mind magazine way back there. You know, this is 50s, 60s time frame, and I think my mom and him got in a discussion about how the kids are going to be raised. And I think my mom went out, and we were raised in the Catholic faith tradition, because I think, you know, my dad was probably a little worried that, you know, I might go up to my homeroom nun and tell her that I am the Christ of God, and the Christ of God is in there too. Well, they wouldn't have flown so well. But, and the other thing is, when I came from Coast Guard boot camp in the 60s, back then, enlisted E6 and below, we wore the sailor suit, you know, the little crackerjack thing with the neckerchief and the 13-button pants. And we had a sleeve insignia on our left sleeve, the Treasury signal, that the difference. And we wore this hat. We called it a Donald Duck hat. It was like a combination cap, you know, like the bus driver's hat, but it didn't have a bill on it. And it said U.S. Coast Guard right across the front of it. And when my dad looked at the hat, he says, "Couldn't they afford a bill?" I said, "No, Dad, this is the way the uniform is." And in 72, the year that he had passed, I had finished officer candidate school, and I finally came in with a cap with a bill on it. And he was happy with that. And later on, I got to have a cap that had the little scrambled eggs on it. You know, and every time I put it on, I'd be thinking of my dad and that. You know, and he was a good dad. He took me for my very first job at the High-Low food store when I was 16. And I think it made an impression on Buzz Nelson, the manager there, because he said, "Yeah, I remember you, Brock, when you got hired. Your dad brought you and waited for you." So anyhow, there's a Bible story about a father who brought his son to the disciples to heal him. And his son was afflicted by a demon that would make him foam at the mouth and throw him on the ground and whatever. And the father brought the boy to the disciples, and the disciples could not heal him. And finally, Jesus shows up at the town where they're at, and there's a big commotion. And Jesus says, "Hey, what's up? What's going on here?" And the man says, "Well, I brought my son to your disciples to heal, but they could not heal him." And Jesus says, "Well, how long has this been going on?" He says, "Well, since he was born. It would sometimes throw him into the water, throw him into the fire, dash him to the earth." And when the demon saw that it was Jesus, he threw the boy into a coma and threw him down on the ground. And so Jesus rebuked the demon and threw him out. And later on, they're in the house. First of all, the man, you know, said to heal his son. And there's some famous lines there. But Jesus tells the man that anything is possible to those that believe. And the man's response is critical. He says, "Lord, I do believe. Help my unbelief." And later on, after Jesus had healed the boy, and the disciples are getting together, and says, "Hey, how come we can't do this?" And Jesus says, "Well, sometimes these take prayer and fasting. Prayer and fasting." So, you know, one of the hallmarks of our unity tradition is we get to look at these stories metaphysically, what they mean beyond the physical story. And men in stories usually represent that thinking part of our consciousness, and women represent the feeling part of our consciousness. So here's this man bringing his younger son, his boy, and probably at the Greek word that they used in that thing meant he was like a pre-adolescent type, so he's young. So sometimes our thinking nature, we have these immature thoughts, and we're trying to work on them with the 12 powers within us, that Christ nature. But we really need to bring them to the full nature of the Christ within. And, and the Christ may say, hey, what's going on here? Let's believe. And we may have those famous words, Lord, I do believe, help my unbelief. There's things that we hold on to unwittingly. There's stuff we want to change, but we kind of hold on to a little bit more. So, we've got to fully let go and use the tools that Jesus had told his disciples. Prayer, that's that connection with God, and fasting. And in Unity, we look at fasting as fasting from negative thoughts, fasting from error thoughts, not so much pushing away from the food table. That helps at times too, particularly at home in COVID time. And so, Lord, I do believe, help my unbelief. And I came across a story about two young boys and a father of the boy way back in 1918. And this is in England, and a young farmer boy was plowing his field. He was plowing it with a horse-drawn plow. He's behind the plow there, and there's a young boy that was in a river nearby, and he heard the young boys yelling and having fun and doing stuff. But then the cries became a little more shrieky, and hey, help, I'm drowning, save me. So the young boy stopped his plowing, ran over the river, jumped in, and pulled the young boy out. Well, about a year later, the young farmer boy is plowing his field again. And a gentleman drives up in a carriage and says, son, were you the young boy that saved my son from drowning about a year ago in this very river? And the young man says, why, yes, I was. And he says, but anybody could do that. I just happened to be here and I jumped in and saved him. So he says, son, if you had all the money in the world, what would you like to do? And the young farmer boy kind of smiled and laughed, says, we're just poor farmers. That's never going to happen. And he says, well, if you had all the money, what would you like to do? And the young boy reflected back and said, I would love to be a doctor. And not only a doctor, but I would love to do research on medicines, because the poor people in our town are dying and they need these cures. And the man says, son, you have the money. I'm going to send you to school. And if you want to be a doctor you'll be. Well, many, many years later, 1945 in February, three of the world greats were gathering together. Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin were to meet at Yalta to kind of decide the fate of the world at the time. But Winston Churchill was taken deathly ill, and they weren't sure that he was going to make it to the conference. But they shipped him a new wonder drug called penicillin. And within a day, Churchill was able to get to the conference and make contributions to help and move our world forward. So that was the second time that Alexander Fleming, the young farmer boy behind the plow and developer of the penicillin medicine, saved the life of Winston Churchill. Wow, talk about synchronicity on things happening. Well, what was the role of the father in that story? As I reflected on that story, I said, I don't think that Winston Churchill ever knew what his dad did for this young farm boy that saved his life. Dad probably didn't tell him, because most dads, we go on and do the stuff and we just do what we're supposed to do. So I think it's important to remember that dads do the best that they can, no matter what. Parenthood is not come with an instruction manual. And, most of the, our learning how to care for people and relate to people and our religion stuff comes from watching our parents do what our parents did. They're kind of the role model. And some were not the best. And people are doing the best that they can about it. So what about real men? Our motion pictures portray some of the real men, which may have been ingrained in our consciousness. And one of them that comes to mind is John Wayne. John Wayne never had a meaningful dialogue with his girlfriend or sat quietly and listened to her. He was in there with a flamethrower in the jungle. And I remember this one movie, PT 109, and John Wayne is playing the part of a PT boat skipper. And there they are on the bridge of the PT boat. The bullets are zipping around. Everybody's huddled up in their service-issued personal flotation device, all except John. John does not have a personal flotation device on, you know. And when I was going through boot camp, we had to practice putting on these service-issued life jackets, which are really cumbersome to put on. And you had to get it on in 30 seconds. And they would have it all trundled up and blow the whistle, and 30 seconds later, that thing better be on your body. And they said, I know John Wayne at PT 109 didn't have these jackets on, but if he was in the Coast Guard, he was going to have one of these on, because it's important to care for yourself if you're going to be caring for others. Charles Fillmore talked stuff about our forefathers and the impact that they had on it. And it's in the book, Talks on Truth. And this is a series of talks that Charles gave from, I think, 1894 up to the 30s. And one of the quotes that Mr. Fillmore had said in Talks on Truth is this. He said, what our forefathers discussed for a lifetime, what bitter battles over and left undecided, the free-minded person sees through in a moment's consideration. You know, back in January 1895, when he had penned that, you know, he was seeing the power of our mind in action. Mind in action. So, you know, sometimes we do things that we have no idea of the major impact that it has on people's lives. There was a young gentleman named Kevin Randall, and Kevin was in a college in Michigan. I believe it was the University of Michigan. And between his freshman and sophomore years, he was invited to be a counselor at a high school leadership camp. And Kevin was already involved in various social action programs, and he jumped at the chance. And the very first day of camp, you know, there's these icebreakers. You get to meet the people and all these little games you play to connect. And Kevin looked over and he saw this young boy sitting underneath a tree, far away from everybody. And he looked at him, and, you know, he was a tall, skinny kid, and his silence was kind of like, didn't want to be disturbed. But in their introduction as a counselor, they told him to be aware of kids that are kind of not fitting in, whatever, and to kind of help draw them in. So Kevin went over and said, well, hi there, my name's Kevin. And the young boy says, my name's Tom. And he knew that he didn't need a pep talk. He just needed a friend to kind of be with him. And he says, well, welcome to camp. And Tom says, well, you know, I really don't seem to fit in. So Kevin left him be, just a few moments of silence, and then he went back to the little ice-breaking activities. On the next day, Kevin's leading songs after lunch, and everybody's singing in and with the top of their lungs, and he looks over, and here's the boy that was under the tree standing next to a window, staring out the window. And Kevin almost forgot the words to the song that he was singing, but, you know, after the little singing, he went over and talked to this young man again, and just for a few moments. And he said, Tom says, the young boy says, you know, this is not really my thing. Well, that night at the counselor meeting, you know, Kevin shared his concerns about this young boy that he saw under the tree and looked out the windows, and, you know, kind of be on the lookout for this young man. Well, the week flew by, and next thing you know, it's Friday night, and they're having their little going away party, you know, connecting with the people, their friends they have just met, who they'll probably never see again. And he looks out on the dance floor, and here is the boy that was under a tree, is a shirtless dancing wonder, dancing with these two gals out there and sharing these little connection moments. And he says, wow, what happened? So anyway, the camp ends. Kevin goes back to school, and about October, he gets a call from an unknown female voice. And the voice says, is this Kevin? And he said, yes, it is. Who's this? And he says, well, I'm Tom Johnson's mom from the leadership camp. Do you remember him? And Kevin says, oh, yes, I do. How's Tom doing? There's a long, pregnant pause. And the woman says, Tom was coming home from school last week, and he was hit by a car and killed. She says, but I had to call and tell you that Tom talked so much about you and all you did for him at leadership camp. He came back from leadership camp a changed boy. His grades came up. He was more active in school. He even went on a few dates. And he says he talked incessantly about you. So what's a little nugget in here? Here's this counselor talks to this gentleman twice in a week, just for brief moments of time. But it was a life-changing event for this young man. He found people were interested in him, and he shifted his life. So, well, what if we had a dad that wasn't the greatest dad in the world? Well, we have our unity principles, and that there's a spark of divinity within each and every one of them. And we get to perhaps use some prayer and some fasting, staying away from the negative thoughts. And, if our fathers are still alive today, perhaps today is the day to make that connection. And if our father is passed on from this plane of existence, there is no time and space and spirit. And we can connect with our fathers. Make that contact through prayer and meditation. Go the extra mile. And in closing, there was one thing that showed up in my email that is a really significant point to the connection that we always have with spirit. And this email had said, nothing can erode your peace when you stake that hallowed ground for yourself. Not circumstance, not attack, not the loss of a relationship. Nothing can delage you from your contentment of spirit. For this to be, you must first ingrain this sacred place deeply in your mind. You must memorize the path to your sacred self by visiting it daily. If you do not, you will get lost stumbling there when you are stricken by the challenges of life. Finding your peaceful centers is simply a sitting quietly and reflecting on your wholeness, contemplating your perfection, celebrating our oneness. Establish a platform of peace within your soul and stand firmly upon it. When the gales of life shriek about you, you will be able to know the truth of peace be still. Namaste, dear one, and let's hear some